Fine. Hold up 3 fingers. Just do it right now, in your head if you have to. 1, 2, 3. Easy. Automatic. You didn't even have to think about it. Now hold up 7 fingers. Still easy. But notice something. 5. Somewhere between 3 and 7, your brain switched gears. You stopped just seeing the number and started counting it, one at a time. Small, deliberate steps to get there. That gap, the one between instantly knowing and having to count, 5, is bigger and stranger than you think. Because for a huge stretch of human history, and for a small number of human societies still alive today, that gap wasn't a gap at all. It was a wall. There were people, real people, 5, with real languages, who had words for 1, 2, 3, and then nothing. Not 4. Not a lot. Just a concept that roughly translates to many, swallowing every number from 4 to infinity into a single foggy word, 5. And the deeper you dig into this, the less it looks like a limitation, and the more it looks like a choice. So today's question isn't how did ancient humans count? It's why did so many of them stop at 3, 5? Why would a mind capable of building pyramids and sailing oceans decide that 4 was somehow too far to bother naming? That's the mystery today, and by the end of this, 5, you're going to look at your own hand differently every single time you count on it. Let's start with the thing that sounds like a joke but is completely real. 5. Anthropologists studying isolated languages have documented number systems that go 1, 2, 3, many. Not as some ancient extinct oddity buried in a dead language, but in living, breathing communities today. 5. The most famous case is the Piraha, a small indigenous group living along a tributary of the Amazon in Brazil. Their language, studied extensively by linguist Daniel Everett, appears to have no words for exact numbers at all. 5. Not even a clean word for 1. Instead, they use terms that shift depending on context, roughly translating to something like a small amount versus a larger amount. 5. Ask a Piraha speaker to match a row of batteries to an identical row, and for small quantities, they nail it every time. Push past 3 or 4, and accuracy falls apart, not because they're incapable, 5, because their language never built the tool to do it precisely. And here's where it gets genuinely uncomfortable for anyone who assumes numbers are just something every human brain naturally has. 5. What if some of the sharpest tools in human cognition, exact counting past a handful, aren't hardwired into us at all? What if there's something we had to invent, language by language, culture by culture, 5, and some cultures simply never needed to? Now, I want to be honest with you here, because this is exactly the kind of claim that gets flattened into a meme online. Ancient people were too dumb to count past 3, 5. That is not what's happening. And the actual story is far more interesting than that lazy version. There are researchers who push back hard on the idea that the Piraha, or any group like them, lack the mental capacity for larger numbers. 5. Some studies suggest that with enough exposure to counting systems, even adults from these communities can learn to count exactly, given time and training. So this isn't proof of some primitive brain stuck at 3. 5. It's proof that number words are a technology, and like any technology, some societies built it and some didn't need to. This is a real academic debate, not a settled fact. But here's what nobody disputes. Number systems that stop at 2, 5, 3, or 4, and then jump straight to many have been documented across multiple unrelated language families on multiple continents, completely independent of each other. This wasn't one weird tribe, it was a pattern. 5. So the question sharpens. Why 3? Why does that number keep showing up as the edge of the cliff? And this is where the story splits into a handful of explanations. And the wild part is they might all be true at once, 5, stacking on top of each other the same way our sleep story last time turned out to have 5 separate causes tangled together. Explanation number 1. Your brain already has a built-in number sense, and it stops working right around 3, 5. This isn't folklore, it's measurable. Cognitive scientists call it subitizing, the ability to instantly recognize a small quantity without counting it. Show a person a group of 1, 2, or 3 objects, 5, and their brain registers the amount instantly, the same way you recognize a face without consciously analyzing each feature. Push to 4 objects, and something shifts. Reaction time slows down, 5. The brain stops perceiving and starts calculating. Researchers studying this, including work built on decades of experiments by cognitive neuroscientist Stanislas Dehaene, found that this 3 to 4 boundary shows up again and again in infants who can't yet talk, in animals, in adults across wildly different cultures. It looks less like a cultural quirk and more like a wall built into the wiring of the primate brain. So when an ancient language stopped naming numbers at 3, it might not have been a failure of imagination. It might have been an honest description of where instant knowing ends and effortful counting begins. They weren't naming what they couldn't do. They were naming exactly what they could see without trying. Explanation number 2. For most of human history, you simply never needed to count higher. Picture a small hunting band. You don't need an exact number to know your group is safe. You need to know if everyone who left this morning came back. 2 children, 1 elder, a handful of hunters. Beyond a certain point, the human eye and memory can track everyone as a felt sense of completeness rather than a tally. A shepherd doesn't need to count sheep as numbers if he simply notices when the flock feels smaller. There are documented herding cultures that could recognize a missing animal out of dozens, not by counting them, but by recognizing the shape and rhythm of the group, the same way you'd instantly notice an empty chair at a dinner table without ever counting the guests. In a world without trade ledgers, taxes, or standing armies needing to be paid, precise numbers past a handful weren't a survival tool. They were a solution to a problem that mostly didn't exist yet. Why invent a word for 40 when your entire economic life never produces 40 of anything to count? Explanation number 3. And this one gets almost eerie once you sit with it. Some ancient cultures may have avoided precise counting on purpose. In multiple traditions across history, there's a documented discomfort, sometimes an outright taboo, around counting people, especially children, precisely. In certain older Jewish traditions, directly counting people head by head was considered spiritually dangerous, and censuses were carried out through indirect methods, like collecting a coin per person instead of counting the person directly. Similar hesitations around directly numbering the living show up in scattered folk traditions across Europe and parts of Africa, where naming an exact count was thought to invite misfortune. Almost as if pinning a precise number onto something fragile, a harvest, a flock, a family, made it more vulnerable to loss. It sounds almost superstitious until you realize the emotional logic underneath it. A vague many can't be subtracted from. A precise number can. If your entire community's disaster planning revolves around loss, maybe there's a kind of protective fog in refusing to count too closely what you're not ready to lose. Explanation number 4. This is the one that finally starts explaining why some cultures blew straight past 3, while others stayed stuck there for centuries. Counting past a handful requires more than a concept. It requires infrastructure. Not roads or bridges, but linguistic infrastructure, a base system. Once a language invents the idea of grouping, 10 fingers, 5 fingers on one hand doubled, 20 as both hands and both feet, suddenly, numbers stop being individual words you have to invent one at a time and become combinations, building blocks stacked endlessly upward. Base 10, base 20, base 5 systems appear independently across the world, precisely because the human body itself is a built-in counting device. 10 fingers made 10 an almost universal stopping point for a base system. Not because 10 is mathematically special, but because it's exactly how many built-in counters you're born holding up in front of your face. Cultures that developed this grouping trick could count into the thousands with only a small vocabulary of number words. Cultures that never made that leap were stuck expanding one number word at a time. 1, 2, 3, and then simply gave up and called everything past that many, because inventing an entirely new, unrelated word for every single quantity forever is exhausting, unnecessary, and frankly, a little insane. But here's where the story stops being about strange, isolated tribes and becomes something much bigger, because ancient number systems weren't uniform even within so-called advanced civilizations. Look at Roman numerals, the system so many of us learned as kids. Notice how oddly it treats small numbers. 1, 2, 3 are simple tally marks I. But 4 isn't a fourth tally mark. It's a completely different symbol built by subtracting 1 from 5. That switch right after 3, that jump from simple counting marks to complicated symbolic shortcuts, is a fossil. 5. It's a leftover trace of exactly the same subitizing wall we talked about earlier, baked directly into one of the most influential number systems in human history. The Romans, thousands of years past any so-called primitive counting stage, 5, still built their entire numeral system around the idea that 3 is where simple tallying naturally ends and something more complex has to begin. And it goes deeper still. Some of the very earliest tally systems ever discovered, 5, carved bones with cut marks dating back tens of thousands of years, show clusters, groups of notches bundled in small batches rather than one long unbroken line. Researchers studying the Ishango bone, a roughly 25 0-year-old carved artifact found in Central Africa, noted the marks aren't random. They cluster in small groupings, suggesting whoever carved it wasn't just making a tally. 5. They were organizing quantities into digestible chunks their own mind could actually track at a glance. Even in the deep Ice Age past, humans seemed to instinctively know that a long, 5, uninterrupted string of numbers was harder to hold in the mind than the same amount broken into small, subitizable clusters. They were fighting the exact same brain limit we're talking about right now, 5, tens of thousands of years before anyone wrote the word 3. So now the picture widens even further, because this isn't just an anthropological curiosity about one remote tribe in the Amazon, 5. It's a window into how counting itself had to be built, piece by piece, against the natural grain of the human brain. And that raises the real question underneath everything we've covered so far. 5. If small numbers are instantly perceived and larger numbers require deliberate, learned effort, then every large number word you've ever used in your life, 12, 40, 100, a million, is a tool someone had to invent, teach, 5, and pass down. None of it was free. None of it was automatic. Somewhere